Bob Robertson passing away today. What was your initial reaction?
Well, I'm of the age that you get to know when somebody's in their 90s that phone call could come every day. And Bob hadn't been in the greatest health. And ever since he had to step down because of, health issues, you kind of, in the back of your mind, knew that this was a possibility at any point in time. But it's still kind of a, wow, he's gone. Wow, we're never going to hear that voice again. Wow, he's, that's, we've had that before with people, great broadcasters in our area. And I was thinking about this today. When I came in 1984, the Pacific Northwest, we had Bob at Washington State. We had Bob Curtis at the University of Idaho. We had Dave Niehaus with the Mariners. We had Bob Blackburn with the Sonics. We had Bob Rondo with the Washington Huskies. And then, Kevin Calabro came in, and then we had Pete Gross with the Seahawks. Well, there's only two of those guys that are still alive, and those two guys aren't doing games anymore. So in that time frame of 35 years, those great voices have been silenced. And it just, it just brings it home. I mean, you think we lost Bob, but those who heard him will never forget Bob. And the voice of Bob Robertson will be heard forever, even after we're all gone, because of, the historical broadcast and those kind of things and interviews. And, so people will not get to enjoy a live broadcast, but they certainly will be able to enjoy what he brought. And he did it at such a high level, and he did it for so long. I think for those of us who were able to listen to him do games, or even like me, work with him in a capacity, we'll never forget Bob, ever.
And just to clarify, how did you work with Bob Robertson, and for how long?
I first got to know Bob through, like everybody else, through listening to games on the radio. The Cougars were on our station when I came to town, and I got to meet him in covering Cougar football. And then when KXLY took over the broadcast rights to the station, then I did the pregame show, or I did the postgame show, and I would do the halftime show on the radio. And then when Bud was doing basketball, because that's what he did, then I got to go down on the sidelines and work with him. I actually worked an Apple Cup with him in the booth, where I was the color guy, the analyst, if you will. And so I spent many afternoons with Bob in the booth, not only listening to him when he was sensational, but also being part of, and I always say this, his broadcast, because people, sorry, Paul Sorensen, sorry, Jim Walden, sorry, Bud Namick, sorry, Dennis Patchin, sorry, Derek Dice, sorry, Vince Grippi. Nobody was listening for any of those guys, Jessamine McIntyre and all the other guys, Alex Brink. Nobody was listening to. They were listening for Bob. We just happened to be on at the same time.
And for someone who has been the play-by-play guy for a long time in this area, basketball, football, so many things, the way that he's remembered, the way that you talk about him being someone who will always be in your mind when you think of Cougar football, you're on that side. What do you think he cares about in terms of being remembered in the Northwest and in Washington in general?
Well, you polled on your Twitter account, and you posted something on Twitter about when we had him on the air one time doing an interview with him, on what we asked him, how he wanted to be remembered. And it was as important for him as to be remembered as a good guy, which he was. I mean, he was a sensational person. He was a great man. He always had time for everybody. I found that interesting. He was more wanted to remembered as Bob Robertson, the guy, not Bob Robertson, the voice of the Cougars, or voice of the Tacoma Tigers, or voice of all the other things that he did. I mean, Bob did indoor soccer. Bob did soccer, outdoor soccer. He did hockey. He's probably done everything. And I always marveled at it. He was one of the last guys recreating baseball games, where he sat in a studio and he got the information on a teletype, and he would have to basically, and if you listen to the games, he did these for the Tacoma Rainiers. He was doing AAA baseball. He wouldn't go on the road. he'd sit in the studio, they'd send him the information, and he would recreate the baseball games. He had a little bat, and he'd hit it for a hit and those kind of things. Yeah. So he is the recreators, and that's why I always marveled that Bob was able to do that. And he was such a great person in painting a picture so you knew you were there. And I think that is a gift that not all broadcasters have. And he was one of the best. If you listen to Bob do games, you didn't have to be in the stands. You didn't have to watch on TV. You knew exactly what was going on, and maybe more importantly, the most important things that were going on. And there was no detail too small, but there was also no detail that got in front of the important things.
Is there anything for you that stands out, what you might have learned from him or gleaned from the way that he broadcast? I mean, I heard today in a few different formats that he used like an abacus to keep track of yardage stats. I mean,
Yeah.
Some of the things that he's done, you say obviously very creative with the bats and everything, but what do you think you learned from him?
I always try not to be somebody else. When I did games, I was trying to be myself. I took what Bob did preparation wise and how he was ready to go for the game and those kind of things. There were things I wouldn't do that Bob did because I didn't want to be Bob Robertson, but also I don't know how to run an abacus. And so I saw it and I watched him do it. And I said, this is the craziest thing I think I've ever seen. I have no idea how he knows what the stats were. And he was within a yard or two. And he was just, as he was doing the game, moving the things on the abacus. That was simply remarkable. But, I think that's Bob Robertson was Bob Robertson. He wasn't anybody else. And I think if you're a young broadcaster, you need to be yourself. And I think if you can take anything from Bob Robertson is Bob wouldn't want you to be Bob Robertson. He'd want you to be himself because you would go about how you would tell the story or paint the picture or do the broadcast in your own way. And I think that, as great as Bob is, Bob would tell you that.
Got it. Sorry, your video went away for a second.
Yeah, it says my battery's dying, but I'm okay. I got plenty of juice. So,
you talk about how his longevity, 70 years or at least 7 decades. What does it take to be that kind of broadcaster to span that many generations?
Good health, genes. Quality genes so you can live to be. I mean, he was doing games until he was about 88 years old. I mean, most of us don't even live that long. And a little bit of luck, but I also think he was so a part of Cougar football that Cougar football Saturday wasn't just the game. It was the atmosphere. You've been there. It's the atmosphere in Pullman. It's the tailgating. And Bob was a key part of that. Bob was the storyteller to Cougar football Saturday. He was the narrator of the event from start to finish, and I think that's very important. And I think that people at Washington State University take pride in being that they're Cougs, and being that's very important to them. Well, Bob was a Coug, and he was important to the people, and I don't think that anybody is ever going to have that ever again, no matter how long you stayed, because it's hard to duplicate what the original guy is. And, I hope Matt Chesnow has a very long run at Washington State University, but I think if you ask him, he's probably not going to be doing games at 88. I will not be doing games at 88. I don't know if I'm doing games at 70, but I mean, I marveled at it. I marveled that he could still see. I marveled that he could still remember, and I'm marveled that he didn't seem to lose his enthusiasm or the ability to paint that picture.
Yeah, seemed like it was truly part of his everyday life and what he wanted to be a part of until the very end. Yeah. Last question for you. Do you have a specific memory or, you heard something during one broadcast that really stuck out to you, or a funny phrase that he said, just something that really stands out about?
In a day or two or a week from now, yeah, maybe I'll remember something. The one thing that I will remember is Bob was always the broadcast booth at Washington State. The door was always open, and I mean that it literally was open, but it was always open for somebody to come in. Now, you didn't go in there and yell in the middle of the broadcast, but I don't know how many times I saw people, Cougars, who were up in the broadcast booth that wanted a picture with Bob or their son or somebody, and they would wait for a timeout, and Bob would turn around, walk up a couple of steps, take a picture, and go back to doing that. He always had time, seemingly, for everybody. I'm not that way. To me, the door needs to be closed, and I need to be concentrating on what I'm trying to do. And that Bob wasn't that way. Bob wanted everybody to feel like they were a part of Cougar football, but he also wanted people to feel important enough to be there. And when he talked about on our old radio show what he wanted to be remembered, he wanted to be remembered more as a human being and how he treated other people than what kind of broadcaster he was. Now, that was important to him, what kind of broadcaster he was, but he wanted to be remembered for how he treated other people. And I can honestly say I never saw Bob yell at anybody. I never saw Bob raise his voice to anybody. I never saw him say a swear word. And that's, we're in a broadcast business where we're full of people who swear, especially sports guys and gals. So I'm sorry to peel the curtain back on you, Alyssa, there a little bit, but I'm just saying it, there was a craft, and the craft was important, but it wasn't the most important thing. And I always remember, 15 years ago, I asked him how long you're going to do this. And he goes, my wife, Joanne, will tell me when it's time to go. Well, he lost Joanne a few years ago. And I think that he didn't know, he didn't want to step aside, but he didn't know how to step aside because he always told himself she was going to be the one to do it. So when I heard that he had passed away, and I heard last night that he had passed away, the first thing I thought of was, well, he's now with Joanne. And they had such a long life and such a great life, and she was always in the broadcast booth with him. And I think that was great. And that's the first thing I remember. Then I was disappointed that, we're not going to hear Bob anymore. We're not going to hear the stories, or we're not going to get to talk to Bob. But the first thing I thought of when I heard the news was, well, he was kind of lost without Joanne, and now he's not lost anymore.
Mm-hmm. It's all about perspective. Holy cow. The important things.
Yeah.
Well, also just reminded me of one last question that I wanted to ask you. Because,
hey, you know what? I'm not doing anything anymore. We can talk for an hour if you want to. I got plenty of time. What is it, 8:15? You're not on the air for another 3.5 or 2.5 hours. You got plenty of time.
We got time. Phone batteries are the only thing that hold us back now, huh?
Well, when you're an old guy, you forget to charge your phone every now and then. So,
yeah. His famous saying, always be a good sport. Be a good sport always. When I first heard that, I thought it was always, like two always. And then I saw, no, it's always.
Yeah.
How do you interpret that? And did you guys ever have a conversation about it?
The first time I heard it, I thought it was really corny.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, come on, you're too good a broadcaster to have that hokey kind of a sign-off thing. It's, give the final score. We'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us. And, but the more I got to know Bob, that's who he was. And as I talked about, he wanted to be known as a great human being. And to be a good sport always, and when you think about it, that's who he was to his core. So it wasn't hokey. It might have been hokey the first time you heard it, but if you got to know Bob, it was not even close to being hokey. It was who he truly was. And it was important to him to remind people to be a good sport. But I think it was also important for him letting people know you can also be a good human being. And that's what I always took out of that after I got past my initial hokiness or corniness. So
We all embrace it a little bit more as we get older, I think.
There's a certain, when you get to know a person, you kind of understand not only what they're trying to do, but how they're trying to do it. And I think that as I got to know Bob and got to enjoy his games and got to enjoy his craft, which was my craft, you kind of get that kind of feeling that, well, wait a second, that's not how it is. And I think the other thing is there's enough ambivalence to that statement that you can interpret really however you want to. And maybe that was part of Bob's master plan, is just get you thinking how that affects you and how you would turn around and be a good sport always. And I don't think he was talking about the next time you go play pickup basketball, the next time you go out to golf. I think he was talking about being a sport as in the sport of life and how we treat other people. And I think there's a little bit more deeper meaning in that than when you originally hear it.
Special message, no matter what. Well, Dennis Patchin, thank you so much for taking the time out of the busy, crazy, hectic lifestyle.
Hey, you know what? I'm glad I could squeeze you into my busy schedule here. It's so jam-packed now that I'm not doing anything anymore. And so are you going to post this whole interview? Or are you going to post this whole thing? Okay, yep. So I just want to know that Alyssa was, I don't want to say my intern, but our intern. So she is just now to the point where she has worked out all of the stuff that I tried to teach her, all the bad things. So she's now to the point where she's gone beyond the stuff that the old DP held her back, and now she's doing that. So yeah, it's but speaking of Bob, he had always made time for young broadcasters. He always would listen to them, and I think that's the thing. And the other thing is he did everything. He broadcast everything, and he was good at everything, and that is a special broadcaster.
I think, it's a club. It feels like everyone passes something along to someone else, and I learned a ton from you, and I keep learning. I heard from one of our directors that I was the loudest on the floor. Imagine that. Back when I was an intern, there's no chance. We were in a small booth, and louder. Go back and do it again.
I'm going to tell you right now, if the sports guy is not the loudest person, then you got real problems, or you got a sports guy that doesn't have a whole lot of passion. Because we're always excited and we're always screaming about everything. And I know when they built the new set and where they put you guys, I figured I would have lasted 3 weeks there before I would have got fired, because you're too close to the set. You're screaming and yelling, and you're watching games, and you just, you know how it is. So
yeah,
good for you. Yeah. Good for you guys to figure out how to turn the volume down a little bit.
Highs and lows. You really got to adjust. Life is a game of adjustments.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.